All right, so for today's lectures, we will be looking at the strategic role of HRM. Strategic role of HRM essentially seeks to discuss how traditional HRM or the HRM that you are familiar with, how it is different from the strategic HRM. And this is seeking to communicate that HRM, as we practice now, is still undergoing some changes and metamorphosis. And best practice suggests that we shouldn't be practicing HRM in the traditional sense, but we should be aspiring to practice what we call strategic HRM, which we discussed extensively last week. So by the end of this lecture, we will be learning things about how traditional HRM differs from strategic HRM. We will also now be discussing how the role that specific HR players have to play in this strategic HRM agenda. So if you pick an HR director, what is his role in strategic HRM? When you pick an HR assistant or someone at the entry level of HR, what is his role in strategic HRM? If you pick an HR manager who is responsible for business development, what is his role? We'll be looking at some of these specific key roles that are played by HRs in an organization. All right. So the strategic nature of HR. As we learned last week, strategic HRM essentially seeks to uplift the functions or the role of HR managers to be forward-looking, that is, to be looking into the future and taking series of actions or initiatives that can sustain the attainment of organizational goals. So the work of HR practitioners, for that reason, can now be divided into two main areas, which is the transactional activities and the strategic activities. Now, these transactional activities are what we conceptualize as the traditional HR functions. So the transactional activities consist of service delivery aspects of human resources. And this includes recruitment. So when I talk about the service delivery aspect of HR, it includes recruitment, training, dealing with people issues, that is employee relations, legal compliance, that is ensuring that the HR does not flout any legal or regulatory policies that are expected to be adhered to by the company, such as equal employment opportunity, equal pay, and so on and so forth. Then employee services. However, the strategic activities support the achievement of organizations' goals and values and involve the development and implementation of forward-looking HR strategies that are integrated with one another and also aligned to business objectives. So this particular bullet, it is essentially trying to communicate that in the strategic role of HRs are not expected to be playing a waiting mode or to be acting in a waiting mode. When I say a waiting mode, it means the HR does not have to be sitting down for decisions to be taken at the top level of the organization, which is then dumped on the HR to implement. Rather, the HR is forward-looking, so the HR must equally be involved in development of the organization's long-term goals and objectives. And by being part and parcel of this activity, the HR will be forward-looking in the sense that he'll be thinking about things that can be done by the company now to achieve the long-term aspirations of the company. And for that reason, the HR's contribution in the company will be more rich than what it is now. So that is the strategic element. Importantly, HR strategic activities also involve practitioners working with line management colleagues in continuous development and implementation of business strategy, which also means that after involving the HR in the development and implementation of long-term goals or aspirations of the company, the HR will now also play a role in disseminating this plan or communicating this plan to other lower level managers. Into HR no kotena board of directors no mo take side decision no form policy ni we are no about back after other departmental heads no HR is supposed to be assisting them. So that is and that specific HR manager is what we call the business development, and I said business initiative HR. So the HR role now becomes more of forward-looking in addition to the traditional ones, all right? HR also has to get its service delivery activities right. That is what it is there to do, the day-by-day, the day-by-day HR activities and the operational ones, which they are already doing, and the reputation of line managers largely depend on this. So it means after organizational policies and programs are formulated at the top level, the HR also has to assist the other line managers to work towards achieving them. And the HR will do this by ensuring the other line managers have the right personnel. So in terms of recruitment and selection, the HR already knows what they want to achieve and which kind of people can be used to attain that. In the other departments, and when these line managers are requesting that, because we want to be this kind of organization in the future, we need to recruit more people, then the HR helps in that regard. And we also need to motivate our employees so that we are able to retain them. The HR has to help in that regard. So it is more forward-looking and also operational. But as we speak now, HR activities tend to be more operational in terms of relying on policies and practices that has been already championed by top-level management, which is then imposed on them to implement. And due to how the field of HRM is evolving, most businesses are now adopting this strategic one, because when you adopt it, it gives the HR manager an equal power like any other top-level manager. And for that reason, the HR manager is also able to make a strong argument or case for what his expertise recommends the organization to be run in terms of the human resource components. In accordance with the resource-based view, which emphasizes the importance of human capital in achieving competitive advantage. On the resource-based view, and I think is last week or so, which places much emphasis that employees are the most vital assets that can turn around all other factors of production and add value to it. So because of this view that HRM subscribes to, and strategic HRM also places much salience or emphasis on it. The credibility of HR also depends on its ability to make a strategic contribution that ensures that the organization has quality of skills, motivates and engage people it needs. So we are simply trying to say that even though the resource-based view is now giving the HR manager more prominence and credibility, that he is the one who can actually identify the right person and place them at the right places in the organization. The HR manager also has to be proactive in trying to attain or meet these needs. And the strategic nature of HR, as differentiated from the traditional one, has been expressed in the strategic partner framework, which we'll be looking at very soon. So the strategic partner framework simply means that the HR manager has to partner all key stakeholders in the organization and contribute to their functioning. And when I say contribute to their functioning, it means that when it comes to the formulation and implementations of policies by key stakeholders in the organization, the HR is inseparable. And that is the strategic element of HRM. So this is the framework that I was talking about. And as I mentioned earlier on, strategic HRM can be contrasted with the traditional HRM in several ways. But in order to build an argument for the differences, we first of all have to look at a framework that was presented by Ulrich, 1998. So I'm referring to this person, Ulrich, 1998. And he was one of the pioneers that was not comfortable with how HRM had been confined to normal administrative activities. And as I speak with you, in most organizations or firms, when you go in there, you realize that the HR performs more administrative role and they are relegated from being involved in strategic decisions. So Ulrich is one of the earlier authorities that challenged that idea, and he proposed a particular framework that can be championed to help in realizing the strategic roles that HR can play. And as I speak with you, it was able to convince a lot of organizations across the globe who now have adopted the strategic elements into their practice of HRM. And this simply means that the HR will now not be performing only administrative roles, but they will also become a strategic partner in realization of the organization's long-term objectives. And according to Ulrich, the strategic HR can be contrasted to the traditional administrative focus of HR through an examination of 4 different roles that HR can play in an organization. So when we talk about the roles of HR in an organization, and you are using the framework to explain it, Ulrich is contending that HR can play 4 different roles to differentiate their functioning from the traditional administrative role. And what are these 4 roles? The 4 roles include being a strategic partner, being an administrative expert, being a champion for employees, and also being a change agent. And Ulrich is arguing that by performing roles that pass around these 4 aspects of his framework, the role of the HR can be contrasted as being more strategic than being what? Traditional. So when we say the HR is becoming a strategic partner, what does it mean? It simply means the HR is now a partner with senior and line managers in strategic execution. And this also seeks to communicate that if you look at the various levels of management, we have top level, middle level, and lower level. The HR will not be at the lower level or middle level. Rather, the HR director in particular will have a seat in the top level management. And it is this top level management that is responsible for the formulation, the deliberation, formulation, and forging of long-term goals of an organization. And this implies that if the HR is able to get this power in an organization, then any long-term deeds that the company wants to attain, the HR will also bring it means any long-term deed that the company wants to attain, the HR will also bring his expertise on board and help them forge something that can actually be attained using the organization's limited resources. So that is a strategic partner. Now, the administrative expert is what HR managers essentially do in the traditional sense, in the sense that in the administrative expert role, the HR is an expert in the way that work is organized and executed. So when it comes to the working processes, structuring of the organization, creating departments, making recruitment and selection into these departments, and making sure the organization is operational at any point in time. That falls within the domain of the administrative experts. So anything that needs to be filed and championed is handled at the administrative level. Then a champion of employee, and as an employee champion, it also means that the HR needs to work very much at the interest of employees. And this is so because strategic HRM is underpinned by the resource-based view, which places much importance on employees as most vital assets. So for that reason, the HR must equally work to the benefit of employees' interests. And this includes working to increase employee contribution and commitment to the organization. So any way and manner that the HR can strive to enhance employees' contribution in terms of their performance and their level of commitment to the organization, the HR must do that. And this can be attained through better conditions of service. This can also be attained through better motivational packages, adequate work resources. Now, lastly, the HR is also expected to be a change agent. And a change agent's role simply means that the HR becomes an agent of continuous transformation who shapes the process and culture to improve an organization's capacity for change. So day in and day out, business environment is constantly changing, and it is only organizations that have the appetite to adapt to these changes that can stand the test of time. Now, in as much as business environments constantly change, it is also expected that when organization is molding to adapt, they also change in a way which will bring out more of their strengths than their weaknesses. So in any form of change which the organization wants to initiate or implement, the HR needs to be at the center stage in ensuring that the work resources of the company, including the human resources, are adequately tapped or harnessed to meet the present demands of the business environment. So essentially, Ulrich is suggesting that, and this is the framework or model that he was talking about. Ulrich is suggesting that in order for us to sufficiently differentiate traditional HRM from strategic HRM, which all HR departments must aspire to practice, we can use 4 key roles that are expected to be played by HR. And he also continues that most HR managers are fixated with only the administrative expert role. But HR managers are admonished to aspire to be strategic partners, wherein they will have a seat in the strategic level, and also the top level of management, which will empower HR to be involved in the deliberation, formulation, and implementation of organizations, programs, and long-term goals. Then the HR is also expected to be a change agent, whereby they will take a center stage in any form of transformation or change that the business wants to introduce in order to meet the changing needs of business environments. And as we always say in strategic HRM, that employees are the most vital assets, the HR has to be a champion, an employee champion, by championing the interests and the well-being of employees, by making sure that at any point in time, employees will be treated as assets, as people that are treasured in the company. So that is the model that Ulrich presented. And it is on this model that we can actually contrast specifically what traditional HR does and how it can be elevated to strategic HR. So the first rule involves becoming a partner in strategy execution. When you say you are a partner in strategy execution, it means that the forging, the formulation, deliberations about what should be the strategy that can be used in attaining long-term goals of the company, the HR must be strongly involved. So here the HR is held responsible for organizational architecture and structure. And it makes sense because it is the HR who understands who will be the best fit for the performance or execution of a particular task. And it is this best fit ideology that the HR will rely on to formulate a structure or a framework within which jobs will be performed in the organization. The HR will then conduct an organizational audit to help managers identify those components that need to be changed to facilitate strategy execution. Now, when strategies are forged, the outcome or the final plan that needs to be implemented may require some level of adjustments. So if the HR has a seat at the strategic table and he is involved in all these deliberations, and he further on does an audit to see some skills gaps, he can quickly remedy the situation by either recruiting people that will suffice to perform those tasks, or by training and developing existing staff to have what it takes to carry out their mandates. And by this, we are not only referring to individuals that will be working in the HR department. We are talking about strategy execution, and that strategy needs to be pursued by all departments available in the organization. So in the frame of reference of the HR, he is thinking about people that fit for the job across all departments and units in the company. And the HR should also then identify methods of renovating the parts of the organizational architecture that needs it. So that is the change or transformation that will be bringing. And finally, the HR would then take a stock of its own work and set clear priorities to ensure delivery of results. And these activities require HR executives to acquire new skills and capabilities to allow the HR to add value for the executive team with confidence. So once the HR is involved in strategy development and execution, he will have a better frame of reference or understanding, a clear picture of what needs to change in the various structures or components of the company in order to fine-tune the organization to achieve its long-term aspirations. And that is the strategic execution role of HR. Now, the administrative expert role, as I explained earlier on, when HR play this role, it refers to HR experts who share their image of rule-making police while ensuring that the required routine work still gets done effectively and efficiently. So, as I said, when you say the administrative role, it means that when everything is said and done on the strategic table, then the HR has to police it and make sure it is carried out through. But that would be a more confined way of playing an HR role, because as an HR, you are not only supposed to be playing an administrative role, but you are also expected to have a say on the strategic table. And you should actually earn it by making a case that when you are given the opportunity on the strategic table, you will come on board with innovative ideas, exciting ideas, and stimulating ideas that can actually transform the fortunes of the company to what it aspires to achieve. Now, this requires improving or rethinking a number of traditional HR functions. So, which means even in the administrative role, we are not expecting to be just implementers of policies, but in terms of benefits and selection, which has now become an activity or an HR function that can be automated by using technology. So if as an HR, you can improve how you conduct some of your traditional HR functions using technology to improve your efficiency and also reduce costs, then you are expected to integrate it. If you do it that way, then you'll be seen as someone who is practicing HR in the 21st century, but not someone who is also still practicing HR as if we are in the Industrial Revolution era, where things are done in a more inhumane or a more archaic manner. Now, such streamlining, that is, if you are able to bring some level of innovation to the execution of traditional HR activities, it is such streamlining of functions would help HR professionals to become strategic partners in the organization and enhance their credibility. So what we are essentially seeking to communicate with this particular administrative expert role is that in as much as HRs are expected to perform administrative roles, they are expected to do it with the adoption of some level of innovation and technology in order to come out more efficient and effective. And if you are doing recruitment and selection, for instance, we don't expect you to be advertising only through the dailies, but your websites as well, you can equally be placing the adverts there. And these days, you can even be sharing it on other social media platforms. Okay. Now, the third role. The third role is the employee champion role. So employee champion is what I explained by articulating that the HR must have the interest of the employee at heart at all times. Now, research suggests that an organization cannot thrive unless employees are committed to and fully engaged in the organization and their jobs. Now, in the new role of employee champion, HR professionals are held accountable for ensuring that employees are fully engaged in and committed to the organization. So if the HR department, which is responsible for championing employee interests to help retain them, is not doing these things, then it means the HR is failing. So it is the HR department that must adequately incentivize and motivate employees, encourage them, help them address their misconceptions or grievances or things that are making them unsatisfied. And if the HR department or unit is able to attain this feat from the employees, then it will also equally results in engaging and committing the employees to the organization's interests. And this involves, in part, partnering with line management to enhance employee morale and training line managers to recognize and avoid causes of low morale. So anything that can cause low employee morale, you have to be able to, based on your experience in your company and also your relationship with the line managers, you should be able to preempt some of these things and then hold them constant so that they do not derail and demoralize your workforce. And some of these things that can cause low morale include unclear goals. If you are working in an enterprise where the goal post keeps shifting, and when it is also not properly communicated, then it can actually demoralize you. It will be as if you don't know your left from your right. Unfocused priorities. So, Bones and ASA, this is how we are going to do things in order to achieve our goals. All of a sudden, not assessment, which means that as a company, you don't have a long-term strategy that you are going to follow through to achieve your objectives. You are just picking and choosing and changing things anyhow with the passage of time. And that may also demoralize employees, because when employees are getting familiar or used to one way of doing things and you change them arbitrarily without any clear vision, it can be some sort of source of frustration, and that will not augur well for the company. Ambiguous performance management. And this is particularly true when the management of employee performance is done solely by supervisors who does not take the, and when I say supervisors, I'm referring to the line managers that have closer relationship with the subordinates. And when they do not treat them well in terms of giving them feedback on their performance and making recommendations on how it can be improved, and also taking corrective actions to address some performance problems, it can be very much frustrating in the sense that the line manager is almost always finding faults in your performance, but they are not willing to go ahead to help you address those faults. So if it can force fighting, the ending could be a bit more, but how you can go beyond this force fighting to help improve the person is also something key. It also involves acting as advocates for employees, presenting them, like representing them and being their voice with senior management, particularly on decisions that impact them. Sometimes, so let me give a quick example. Sometimes as lecturers, our immediate supervisor or our line manager is our HODs and our coordinators. Now, oftentimes, someone say, when you are working with a coordinator who is an employee champion or who has employees' interests at heart, maybe a lecturer may say class 1 or 2B, now students now can report to ama maybe a VC, and I say someone beyond the HOD at it. Now, if you have an HOD who is an employee champion, it means that when such a situation comes to their front, they will not be quick to demoralize and answer to bastardize the performance of the lecturer. Such a person will at least rely on the best records that he has on the lecturer to make a case. This is on characteristics of the lecturer in question, and based on the track record, maybe I will go through challenges until one makes these classes. So a only reason why you miss the class, or to charge you. And that is how we expect HRs to be working in their organization. Assembly within one. And pray employee, no, kind of say nothing. Rather, at least to charge based on the good side that you know of this particular employee. whilst you also try to investigate why those performance problems are occurring and put measures in place to contain it. So that is the employee champion role. The last one is the pace of, as a change agent. So the pace of change experienced by organizations today can be dizzying. And when I say it can be dizzying, is that sometimes if you do not have a strategy to match up to it, especially if you do not have control over the changes that are occurring in the business environment. So you may become very much dizzy with the pace of change. Now, so when we say the HR must play a change agent role, the HR has to be able to build the organization's capacity to embrace and capitalize on new situations. So every new misfortune which the business will face from the environment, external business environment, you should rather equip yourself to take advantage of it. And this will ensure that the change initiatives are defined, developed, and delivered in a timely manner. So it means that the HR manager has to play a central role in any change initiative that the company will be going through. HR also needs to help the organization plan for and overcome any resistance to change that might present itself. Now, in Primpi, if companies are going through some form of change, or they are planning to go adopt a new way of operating, it means that it doesn't have to come as a surprise to the employees who are going to be the final implementers. Rather, it has to be systematically introduced and communicated to employees. Now, if the HR plays a central role or takes a center stage in introducing and initiating change in an organization, it means that he should be the person that understands how employees accept and embrace change. And so in terms of communicating the change, intended change to employees, it has to be done in a way, a manner that will invite employees to be even involved in decisions that are going to finally affect them. So once you involve employees from the beginning in this change you are trying to initiate, finally, when the time is right for you to implement it, you are not likely to face any form of resistance. And the ideology behind such a strategy is that right from the beginning, you have been preparing the mind of the employees towards it. You have also been involving them in the outcome which is going to affect their activity. So it will not come as a surprise to them. Rather, they will embrace it wholeheartedly. And even if there is going to be some form of resistance, it wouldn't be as huge as compared to situations where the change is drastically introduced to employees. So the HR equally has a role to play in there, because when some of these transformations or change will involve transitioning from manual ways of working to maybe a more innovative way of working, the HR will have to prepare the ground for the employees to be trained and fine-tuned before the change is finally initiated. All right. So we are essentially saying that based on Ulrich's framework, traditional HR can be differentiated from the strategic HRM in 4 key roles, and which includes being a strategic partner, being an employee champion, being a change agent, and also being, so the second one, being an administrative expert. Now, if you do the permutations and combinations, and you try to compare traditional HR to strategic HR beyond these 4 rules, okay, beyond these 4 rules, we can get a number of ways in which traditional HR differs from strategic HR. So that is what we are going to look at now. In the strategic role of HR now, essentially, it includes the HR being a strategic partner or being involved in strategy execution, being an employee champion, being a change agent, and also being an administrative expert. Now, beyond this, traditional HR can also be differentiated from strategic HR in a number of ways. And the first one, so can you see my screen? Can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Very good. So I want to say at the left side, Hannah, is the specific rules that are expected to be executed by HR, irrespective of the role being performed under the traditional or the strategic frame of reference. But if you pick each of these rules, traditionally, there is a way HR does it, and strategically, there is a way we expect HR to do it. So that is what we are going to look at shortly. All right. So let's make progress. In terms of the responsibility for the HR, not the traditional HR, we can construe him to be a staff specialist, which means that the HR plays only a supporting role to other line managers, in the sense that the HR only function within the HR department, whereby after the long-term policies and programs are formulated, the HR also develops one for the department and use that to bring some form of change. But under the strategic HR role, we expect the HR to also be a line manager. And a distinction can be made between line managers and staff managers. So when we say the HR is a staff manager, it means that they are not involved in the series of activities or initiatives that brings about the production and distribution of goods and services of the organization. But when we say the HR now has to be a line manager, it means the HR plays an integral role in the production and distribution of the company's goods and services, which means we now have to introduce certain HR portfolios or responsibilities, such as business development partner or business partner. And such an HR manager works in close relationship with other line managers. So whether you are the manager of the plants, whether you are a manager of the procurement department, whether you are manager of accounting and finance, such a business development HR manager play key role over there as well. So his office is not actually in the HR department, but they work in tandem with all these other line managers. So which means that proactively, when things are not going on well at those places, the HR expert who is playing a role as a line manager in this sense will now see how it can be remedied through some form of training or development or some form of performance management or some form of employee motivation. In terms of focus, traditional HR tend to be adopting what we call employee relations, which means they are cardinally interested in resolving issues that fall within the confines of the organization, essentially only the internal stakeholders of the company. But in the strategic role, we expect the HR to also have a focus in partnering with other external and also internal customers. So some external customers may be possible investors, creditors, your debtors, and so on and so forth. Whereas the internal one will be your employees, your management, and other, I'm kind of say, I'm motor stock company mono. I've forgotten the word. So anyone that has a role to play in the internal realm of the company also has to be your focus. So you focus both internally and externally. That is a strategic one. Now, in terms of the role of HR, under the traditional one, we say it tends to be what? Transactional. So the HR role is more of transactional change follower and respondent. In other words, the HR operates in a waiting mode. Transactional means that I will say, BB, you take a decision, be was near their manner. No, I implement it. So if nothing is coming from the top level management, then the HR will be working with what he has already. But in any time some changes are made in terms of the plan of the company for attaining their long-term goals, then the HR gets what? To respond to that. So that will be the transactional mode. But at the strategic level, the HR is expected to adopt what we call a transformational change leader and initiator, which means the HR does not have to wait for a decision to be taken at the top level before he implements it, but rather he should be involved in bringing this change and this decision making at the top level. So that means the HR must also be what? A transformational leader in the sense of being involved and bringing some level of change at the top level decision table, which can then be disseminated to other levels of management, be it the middle or lower or operational level, and also the functional or line departments to initiate it. Now, in terms of initiative, traditional HR, because they use the transactional role or mode to operate, they tend to be slow, reactive, and fragmented. They are slow because if nothing is done at the top there, they will not react to it. And when they are also doing it, they are almost always waiting for the green lights before they can go all out. And it tends to be fragmented because at any point in time, they need to get the support of top-level management. Now, because at the strategic HR, we say the HR has a seat on the strategic table, and they are involved in deliberations, initiations, and bringing about change or transformations. Things get done very quick because they are already on the strategic table, and as a part of top-level management, especially the HR director. Pushing your mama fast, and they tend to be proactive. What I mean by proactive is that because he has a fair idea about what is being done at the top level, they also prepare the ground to be ready for such policies to hit the ground running. And they also work in an integrated manner, not a disjointed or an all-coordinated manner. In terms of time horizon, traditional HR roles tends to be short-term in the sense that until a communication comes from the top for them to do something, then there will be nothing, there will be no room for them to be bringing some form of initial change. But, and we also say it is short term because their foresight is on the administrative or operational aspects of the company. So what things can be done in order to make sure that the organization's short-term goals can be attained with limited resources. That is the foresight or the time horizon of traditional HR. But for the strategic HR, it is both short, medium, and long-term. It is short because it is also equally concerned about the day-to-day attainment of the organization's objectives through their numerous operations. It is equally interested about the medium-term time horizon in the sense that some of the goals may not be attained within a day or within a week. It may take about a month or some years. Then it is also long-term because the efforts that are being made to achieve certain feats in the short and medium term are all deliberately programmed for the realization of a long-term objective which may be attained in about 10 to 20 years to come. So that becomes the long-term vision of the company. Another strategy. In terms of control, the traditional HR tends to be more bureaucratic. And this makes sense because it adopted a lot of principles and ideologies from the scientific management system, which expects organizations to work in a rigid and inflexible manner, whereby things that can be simple things that can be done in a day needs to go through the various hierarchies of command and various protocols before it is approved. But under the strategic HR, in terms of control, it tends to be more organic. It tends to be more fluid, flexible. So whatever is necessary to succeed is adopted. And you may require to bypass the hierarchies or bureaucracies that have been laid down, but you go to the person that matters to give you results. So that is the strategic role. It is more flexible. Now, which means that so under the control, if there is an issue that you think you have to bring to the attention of the CEO, under the strategic one, you can go in and make your case without being reprimanded. But under traditional HR, your immediate boss and other hierarchies that you ignore may even reprimand you. And they may even ostracize you for flouting the laid down protocol that needs to be followed. Now, in terms of job design, in terms of job design, because traditional HR adopts the bureaucratic structure in terms of operation, it has tight division of labor. So, their demarcation, what they are expected to do. There is high level of independence because everyone specializes in one aspect of the job and master it craftily. But under strategic HR, the job design adopted is more broad, flexible, cross-training, and also having teams. So, Obenhu said, when you are being given a contract, they throw in some clauses where they will tell you that sometimes if your services are needed at other departments and you have what it takes to execute them, you will be called upon to do that. So which means your expertise and knowledge should not be confined to only what you were hired for, but you should equally be ready to do things that are beyond outside your department's functioning, okay? Which means that there is what we call cross-training, and cross-training simply means that when you are training employees, you do not train them on skills and knowledge that can help them flourish in their department, but you train them on skills and knowledge that can help them move from one department and also flourish in other departments. So that is the cross-training. And individuals are expected to work in teams or in groups, as opposed to the traditional one where individuals work in tight corners or there is higher level of independence. So there is more interdependence under strategic HR, whereby the outputs of one employee may become the inputs of another. So you need to depend on each other in order to flourish. Now, key investments. So under traditional HR, because such HR structure is not able to make a strong case for the treatment of employees as vital as assets, much of the organization's investment is in capital, so landed properties, vehicles, or anything that's your friends say goodwill, anything that will boost the physical appearance and assets of the company. That is where they invest in. But under strategic HR, much of the investment is in people or the employees and their knowledge, because it is these people that we perceive as what? Vital assets, and who can also bring more revenue and more returns to an organization when they are adequately what? Empowered. Accountability. The traditional HR is essentially a cost center in the sense that they are perceived to be rather increasing the cost or expenses of the company, in the sense that when it comes to wages and salary, it is the company that needs to be footing these bills through the way HR has placed employees. When it comes to addressing health and safety needs of employees, it is the company that will be doing it. So the HR is construed as a cost center who is always increasing the financial expenses of a company. But under strategic HR, the accountability of HR is seen as an investment center, in the sense that the HR is able to articulate and use a number of HR metrics, such as return on investments, cost-benefit analysis, to make a strong case for the returns that the company is getting for having invested or empowered people through training and development or through some form of motivation. So this is how traditional HR can be differentiated from strategic HR. Any questions so far? Any question? All right. So let's quickly. So I have detailed explanations of each of these points. And in the next few minutes, what I'll be doing is that I'll be going through them with you to see if there is an aspect that I left out as far as the explanations are concerned. So what it means is that each bullet here explains one of the avenues that traditional HR can be differentiated from strategic HR is when it comes to the responsibility now. The first bullet will explain how the two can be differentiated. Okay. All right.
Yes.
So strategic HR differs radically from traditional HR in a number of ways, as illustrated in the figure exhibit 4.5. So this is the exhibit 4.5. Okay. Now, in traditional approach to HR, the main responsibility for people management program rests with staff specialists in the corporate HR division. Now, when we say it rests with staff specialists in the corporate HR division, it means that the banking industry of Ghana, any example. So you all agree with me that when you go to the various branch levels of our banks and our the various regional the branches they have outside where the headquarters is found, you will not find someone playing the role of an HR. Okay, rather, who handle any HR issue, it has to be pushed to Accra or the headquarters where some of these HR specialists can be found to address your needs. So that is what we mean by the staff specialists are in the corporate HR division. So the corporate HR division is essentially the headquarters where all the key figures are found. But a strategic approach places the responsibility of managing people with the individuals most in contact with them. Assuming still in the banks, it is the operational manager that is closer, and also the branch manager, which is closer to the staff at the branch level. Such a person needs to be empowered to be playing an HR role in addition to his operational roles and their respective line managers. So any other line manager, be or branch, be an region, be a HR, and a strategic dispensation, he needs to be equipped to also be handling HR requests that does not necessarily have to be pushed to the headquarters for it to be handled. So when you do it this way, then you are bringing the HR closer to the staff at the various regional and branch levels. And in essence, strategic HR will argue that any individual in an organization who has responsibility for people is an HR manager, regardless of their technical area in which he or she works. Internal makers, operational manager can also be empowered to be incorporating HR initiatives in his function, in the sense that once the operational manager is able to execute an HR way without necessarily pushing it to go through several hierarchies, at the end of the day, you will end up satisfying the needs of employees. To say nothing, was all free, baby, I will call headquarters and some HR co attending to something that maybe if someone has been given the power to carry out at winner at the regional level, you'll be able to go through. So the strategic one tends to decentralize the HR specialist role by empowering other key figures that are closer to employees to do them. So the second one, which is about employee relations. Traditional HR focuses on its activities on employee relations, ensuring that employees are motivated and productive, and that the organization is in compliance with all necessary employment laws, as illustrated in the operational quadrants of Exhibit 4.1. Now, Exhibit 4.1, yes, I'm going to review, just so that you are able to put it into perspective. I will say this is the operational aspect of Exhibit 4.1. And operational aspect, he is playing an administrative expert role and also an employee champion role. So I would say, in an attempt to differentiate traditional HR from strategic HR, you are making reference to these two roles, which means that in terms of the operation of the HR manager, he is also expected to place much emphasis on the needs of the employees as far as their relationship within the organization is concerned. And also as far as the adherence to laws and regulations are intended. But as a strategic approach, there is a shift of the focus to partnership with both internal and external constituent groups. So employees are only one constituency within the internal stakeholders of the company. The focus on managing people is more systematic, with an understanding of a myriad of factors that impact employees and organizations, and how to manage multiple relationships to ensure satisfaction at all levels of the organization. And for that reason, critical partners, as I mentioned earlier on, in the process include the employees themselves, the customers, stakeholders or owners, regulatory agencies, and public interest groups. So it simply means that in your attempt to carry out employee relationship activities, your fixation should not be within the company. That is, you are not supposed to be interested in a harmonious relationship between employees and managers, but you should equally be interested in the relationship between employees and their customers as well, employees and other regulatory bodies. And this becomes important when maybe a government agency has to come in to settle a dispute between management and employees and other public interest groups. So once you elevate it to that level, then you are doing the strategic one. Then there is also the idea that traditional HR assumes role of handling transactions as they arise. And like McCann said, they operate in a waiting mode. This may involve compliances with changing laws, rectifying problems between supervisor and subordinates, recruiting and screening applicants for current needs, and basically responding to events after they happen. So that is what we mean by the waiting mode. But under the strategic HR, the HR is much more transformational. So that is what I indicated earlier on in my explanation, that they play a transformational leadership role. And the HR must also realize that the success of any initiative for growth, adaptation, and or change within the organization depends on the employees who utilize any change in technology or produce any change in the organization's products or service. HR therefore plays more of the transformational role in assisting the company in identifying and meeting large changes it faces in its external environment by that internal mechanism that facilitates the change, which means that we are talking about the HR becoming a change expert or a change agent who will have a seat at the strategic table and be involved in all series of actions or initiatives that will bring change to improve the functions of the company. Now, it can also be similarly said that any initiative for change coming from traditional HR are usually slow and fragmented or piecemeal and not integrated, because don't forget, they are playing or they are operating in the waiting mode. Rather, strategic HR is more proactive and systematic in change initiatives. They are responsible for rectifying a specific employee discipline problem or moving to a new sales commission system are examples of the former approach. Strategic HR is flexible enough to consider the various time frames, which is short, medium, and long term, as necessary to facilitate the development of programs and policies that address critical strategic changes being faced by the organization. And at the same time, these strategically conceived initiatives must be developed and implemented in concert with the HR system. So that is what I meant by, unlike the traditional one in which the HR manager tends to operate in a waiting mode and only brings about change after it has been conceived and passed down from the top level. Under the strategic HR, the HR frame of reference is not only short, because they are equally concerned about the medium to long-term aspirations of the company. Now, in terms of control, the traditional approach to HR manifests itself in bureaucratic controls through rules, procedures, and convoluted policies that ensure fair treatment of employees and predictability in operations. And indeed, Exhibit 4.1 knows that the role of HR as administrative experts in developing and enforcing rules and standards of behavior for employees. So strategic HR, on the other hand, realizes that such an approach limits an organization's ability to grow and respond to a rapid changing business environment. For that reason, strategic HR utilizes controls that is much more organic, fluid, loose, and free-flowing, with as few restrictions on employee actions and behavior as possible. So it's more or less like you are having an open door policy, whereby if the issues demand you to bypass certain protocols in the ladder to get things done, you do that. It even empowers people to take responsibility and initiative, and it encourages people to be taking their own initiatives. So it tends to be more flexible under strategic, unlike being more rigid and bureaucratic under traditional. Now, in terms of functional specialization, traditional HR grew out of the scientific management approach to managing of employees. And it is also characterized by higher level of job specialization to increase employee efficiency. And it is because of this reason that it tends to be more bureaucratic. For that reason, there is a tight division of labor with independent tasks allowing people, or which allow employees to develop specific skills and maintain a focus on these specific job responsibilities. Into the FAO say, oh, yeah, accountant. That area, they be able to train anything that is outside accountancy, which may even be necessary for your well-being. You may not get the opportunity to go for such training programs. But under the strategic one, the case is different. A strategic approach to HR allows a very broad job design, which emphasizes functional flexibility and a need to respond as change takes place in the external business environment. For that reason, specialization is replaced by cross-training. Unlike traditional HR, where employees are cardinally empowered to specialize in only one area. Even we HR can say recruitment and selection away, and no penal in the company. If there is no need for recruitment within a particular period, now home for soccer in the company, it becomes questionable. Now, if you are a compensation and benefits manager, then for you, anything that borders on issues outside compensation and benefits will not be of interest to you. So when you are going for training programs under traditional HR, it will be how to implement best practices in compensation and benefit. But under strategic HR, there is what we call cross-training, whereby in as much as you will be specializing in an area, you are also expected to learn about how other areas may impact on your job and how you may also efficiently impact in other jobs. For that reason, you get to understand other people's frames of reference and other departments' frames of operating. And that means that independent tasks become replaced by teams and groups, some of which are permanent and some of which are temporary, and many of which are managed autonomously by workers themselves. So it actually empowers employees to take their own initiative and learn additional stuff beyond what departments they have been placed to work. Traditional HR can get to this strategic HR that best practice is recommending companies to champion if they have the HR manager at the strategic table, and also if they have the financial muscle to accommodate it, because you may end up bringing a lot of changes on board, which may need a lot of funding to survive. Okay, and if the company does not also see it fit to have the HR on the strategic table, then achieving all these strategic initiatives or roles may never see the daylight. Now, the traditional HR approach to HR also sees an organization's key investment as its capital, products, and brand name, technology, and investment strategy. So traditional HR, for that reason, they invest more in their capitals. And then so they buy more lands. To go so make us say, no, you must asasibia beda, asasibia beda, oyibi, and I say, oyarifa. So let's go and buy it for future posterity. And I say, we need to buy more new properties in terms of cars and other machinery. We need to get a goodwill, a better brand name for ourselves. That is what traditional HR is mandated to help the company realize as a way of empowering employees or motivating employees. But strategic HR sees organizations' key investments as its people and their knowledge and abilities. For that matter, in as much as the pursuit of attaining capital and other products for the company and the brand name or technology is important, equal salience must be placed on the knowledge and any form of investments in your employees, which is the people. So the strategic HR approach realizes that competitive advantage is enjoyed by an organization that can attract and retain knowledge workers. So as much as possible, you should be pursuing a strategy whereby you at almost always be attracting and retaining knowledge workers. And these knowledge workers are individuals with distinctive capabilities, which I mentioned last week. And these knowledge workers should be able to optimally utilize and manage organizational capital resources. In the end, I can say if you are able to empower and invest in your employees in terms of their knowledge, skills, and abilities, then they can also harness your resources and get the best out of them for you. And in the long run, people are an organization's only sustainable competitive advantage. In other words, it is when you are able to add value to your employees and you are also you successfully replicate this value across the length and breadth of your workforce, that you can have sustained competitive advantage. And your rivals will have a strong challenge even when they try to imitate or replicate your model. Finally, accountability for HR activities in the traditional approach considers functions including HR as a cost center. There's HR and the DBA or the ECANEBA, which is an emphasis on monitoring expenditure and charges and charging overhead to fiscal units. As an investment approach, which the strategic HR subscribes to, it considers returns as well as expenditures, with attention paid to the value added by HR activities. So strategic HR is able to make a case that in as much as we are spending X amount of money on our employees, this is the value or return that we are getting for our investment or for our expenditure. So when you do that cost benefit analysis and you cogently articulate it to top level management, especially if you have a seat over there, anytime you want to embark on similar initiatives in future, they will also buy into the idea, because at the end of the day, after investing so much in the employees, the company is also getting so much returns for such an investment. And that will be a fruitful venture to pursue. So this is how you can distinguish between the traditional HR from the strategic roles that HR also play. And in summary, strategic HR can be differentiated from the traditional one by conceptualizing the strategic HR as any HR that adds value with effective management of 4 flows. And these 4 flows include the flow of people, how people are recruited and selected into the company. The flow of performance, how performance standards are set and managed for their realization. The flow of information, how feedback is given to employees for them to improve upon their priorities and their work. And the flow of work, which also considers the process in which employees engage and the appropriate responsibilities for these processes. So once you look at it this way, then you can juxtapose strategic HR from traditional HR. Any questions so far? All right, if there are no questions, then let's look at the specific rules. Over the past few hours, I have emphasized that in order to attain the strategic role fits in an organization, the HR must be given the opportunity to play an instrumental role in the formulation, the deliberations, and implementation of a company's long-term goals, which means that for the HR to play this strategic role, a new seat has to be created for the HR at the strategic level, and I say at the top level management. Now, this top management level seat that we are going to create for the HR is what we call the HR director. So when we are identifying the main directors that call the shots in an organization, the HR must also be given a role as a director in the company. And what is the role of this HR director? The strategic role of HR directors is to promote the achievements of the organization's business goals by developing and implementing HR strategies that are integrated with the business strategy and are coherent and mutually supportive. And two, ensure that the strategic approach is adopted by the HR functions that support the business and adds value to the company. And to carry out this role, the HR director should, one, understand the strategic goal of the organization, which means, yeah, for me, strategic goals, no cry, and I say, or Tisrowa, near Kenya and Nitia, and Obetia say, so he should have a seat at the strategic table. The HR should also appreciate the business imperatives and performance drivers relative to these goals. So he should be able to make a business case for why maybe we need to recruit more people into the organization. He should be able to make a business case for why the wages and salaries of employees must be improved. He should be able to make a business case why some type of training and development programs need to be implemented. Then the HR should also be able to comprehend how sustainable competitive advantage can be obtained through the human capital of organization and know how HR practices can contribute to the achievement of these strategic goals. Again, he should also be able to contribute to the development of the business strategy by emphasizing how the organization's distinctive human resources can make an impact. He should also contribute to the development of the business of a clear vision and set of integrated values. And all these things are done on the strategic table, which means that if you do not have a seat at the strategic table, then you will not be able to contribute on some of these deliberations. To be able to ensure that senior management understand the HR implications of its business strategy. And HR implications simply means that if the organization, for instance, decides to pursue an innovative strategy, what does it mean for the human resources? It simply means that the human resources now have to integrate and incorporate the use of technology in performing normal day-to-day activities. And that will require the human resources to be trained and developed in adopting some of these innovations or technology and access software. He should also be aware of the broader context in terms of the actors or factors in the business environment that can affect the outcome of the company's operations. And these include the economic, social, legal, political, and all those other factors. Now, the HR should also understand the kind of employee behavior required to successfully execute the business strategy. As an HR manager, you are already trained to identify behavioral tendencies that are best fit for the execution of a particular task. And so when you are taking decisions at the strategic level, on the strategic table, you should be able to bring this level of expertise in your explanations for the other directors that you'll be working with to see things in a more realistic manner as far as how employees behave is concerned. So they should also be thinking in terms of bigger and longer term picture of where HR should go and how to get that. And believe in and practice evidence-based management. Now, when we say evidence-based management, it means that the management of people should not be based on excuse me to say, the intuitions and the subjective experiences of managers. Rather, it should be based on hardcore facts. It should be based on evidence. And I said it should be based on information that can be used to make a strong case. So if, for instance, the HR manager is saying, because our company wants to pursue an innovative strategy, we need to quickly run a training program for the employees to understand how to use this particular tool we are going to use. What is the evidence that you are using to buttress your argument that there is a need for such a training program to be run? You should be able to put together a report that contains that when companies adopt such innovative strategy and they also go ahead to train their employees, they are able to get higher returns on such an investment. So once you manage your resources and also carry out HR activities in this regard, then we say you are doing evidence-based management. You are not just saying we have to do it for doing it, but that you are buttressing your case with evidence to make it much stronger and much compelling. He should also be capable of making powerful business case for any proposals on the development of HR strategies. So this one is tied into what I was saying earlier on. That's the role of the HR media. It is very much important for you to convince all other people, especially if you are going to be on the strategic table. You should be coming across as someone who knows his work and who can actually convince others to even change their previously held opinions. And what I mean by previously held opinions is that sometimes people may have their entrenched positions before they come to the decision table at the strategic level. But if you are able to make them realize the necessity of some of the propositions you are bringing on board as an HR expert, they will be willing to think through it and change their previously held opinions about how things are supposed to be carried out. So that is the strategic role of the HR director, who is supposed to have a seat at the upper on the strategic table, and I say as a part of the top level management. Now, the strategic role of heads of HR functions. I want to say so we have now moved away from the HR director, who is part of the top level management, and we have come to the HR departments, and we are looking at the various functional heads. So within the HR departments, you can have the head for recruitment and selection, the head for employee training and development, the head for compensation and benefits, then the head for performance management. So what this means is that when they are supposed to play a strategic role, they are expected to mutually support each other. And what it also seeks to communicate is that the mutual support of each other means that the recruitment and selection manager of the HR department must always be working in concert with training and development manager. You recruit no one also take you over to train them and give them some form of orientation. Then the compensation and benefit administrator must also be ready to incentivize these recruited people through what? Wages and salaries. Performance administrative manager must also be willing to do that So essentially, the strategic role of heads of HR functions and as HR managers is essentially the same as that of the strategic director. But the only difference is that strategic director, I don't know what to say, or to strategic table, and I say, you're part of the strategic management. But heads of HR heads of HR functions and heads of HR managers, they are found within the HR department, but they are expected to also mutually support each other towards the realization of the HR goals that are usually derived from the corporate goals of the company. Now, the strategic role of the business partner. Because we expect the HR manager to be working and having better understanding of how other heads of departments operate. We need to create a new portfolio whereby, hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes,
sir. So you cannot hear me?
So it's on and off because of the rains, but we are managing. Thanks.
All right, okay. So for this reason, we need to create a new department for, a new portfolio for an HR manager that will be very much knowledgeable and familiar with how other business units also operate. So typically, such people are supposed to have a background in which is well versed in business administration, which means you must understand how procurement and logistics is done. You must understand how the finance people work. You must understand how the accounting department also works. You must understand how the property department and what have you works. So such a person will not be just an HR specialist, but he will be a business development partner who can partner other organizational units or functions in which they operate. So their actual office may not even be in the HR department, but their actual offices will be under these functional units, which means they come across as individuals who are trained HR experts, but that also understand how that specific unit or department functions. And with that in view, they will be able to help the company in carrying out business and competitive ventures. In other words, they will help such departments in carrying out their functional responsibility as well as the role of HR manager. If you're as an HR person who also understands how that department must work, and because he's closer to that department, he has to proactively perform HR roles over there for it to flourish. And see, what it means is that when maybe procurement and logistics department needs a support of the HR manager, he's the first person they will call on to help them address. If he is able to successfully resolve it, it may not even come to the attention of the other functional HR managers. They will only get to know it when he is writing his reports to them. Then the strategic contribution or the strategic role of HR advisors or HR assistants. So these are actually HR personnel that provide support services to HR functional heads or HR managers. So the role of HR advisors or assistants is primarily that of delivering effective services within their function or as member of the HR service center. It simply means that they are expected to continue providing their support services, but in a more innovative way. So while they will not be responsible for formulating of HR strategies, They may contribute in them within their own specialty. And what this means is that over time, when the head of HR department or the HR director sends information to them that they are going to take a particular decision on the strategic table about certain aspects of the company, they must bring some of the realities on the ground to the attention of their supervisors for them to also consider them in their deliberations. And they will also need to understand the business goals of the department or managers for whom they provide the services in order to ensure that these services support the achievement of those goals. So that will be the end of today's lecture. Essentially, we have learned a number of things, which includes how what it means for the HR to be playing a strategic role. For the HR to be playing a strategic role, it simply means that the HR must now have a seat on the strategic table, which is to become a member of the top level management and involved in deliberations, initiations, and taking of actions on the long-term goals, or when it comes to the forging of long-term aspirations of a company. And to also properly juxtapose how traditional HR is different from strategic HRM, we made reference to Urich's 4 imperatives or 4 models, which are essentially the 4 roles that HR managers in any strategic environment are expected to play. And this includes to act as strategic agents and as an executor of strategies. They also act as change agents. They also act as administrative experts. And finally, they also act as champion of employees and as employee champions, whereby they emphasize more on the interests of employees at heart. And beyond these things, we also use them to contrast how the adoption of these or the playing out of these specific HR strategic rules will differentiate the traditional one from the HR one. And that is what I presented in Exhibit 14. And finally, we have also looked at the strategic role of the HR director, the strategic role of the HR functional heads or HR managers, the strategic role of HR business partner, and finally, the strategic role of HR advisors. Any question?